received his first Award of Excellence in 1986. He received his fifth Award of Excellence 22 years ago, which entitled him to become a master and join the ranks of the other masters for the society. Over the course of Walt's membership in the society, he's earned very well-deserved at least 17 accolades and awards from the Society of Animal Artists. And we're here today to honor his mastership, but to also pick his brain to find out what makes Walt Matia tick. What makes Walt Matia one of the best known animal art sculptors in this country. Walt. When did you realize you wanted to be a sculptor?
Actually, as an answer to this, in 1964, my family went to the New York World's Fair. And while we were at the fair, we also went to the Bronx Zoo. And I saw the Rainy Gates by Paul Manship, and I was hooked. I was like, I want to do this. When I was 14, you know, as kids, I lived in Cleveland, Ohio, which we wouldn't think of as a hotbed of trapping animals, but I had my Boy's Life magazine, and I bought my muskrat traps from herders, and I was trapping in the metropolitan parks. And I was in the basement one day, and I had this pile of dead muskrats and pelts, guts, and the family laundry. And my mother walked downstairs, and she goes, no. But instead of hitting the fan, she basically got on the phone, and she called the director of the museum in Cleveland, a guy named Bill Shealy, who was a fabulous animal painter. And she said, I'm bringing him down, he's your problem now. And I went down, it was a Saturday in November, and I met a man named Larry Izzard, who was a wonderful taxidermist, a wonderful artist. He was a member of the society, I'm almost sure.
No, he was.
And he was a great sculptor, and Larry became my closest friend in the world until he died 10 years ago. And so between those two events, seeing the Rainy Gates and meeting Larry Izzard, I knew I wanted to do this. Now, there were a lot of detours. I did work for the Natural History Museum all through high school and all through college, and for a year after college, when we went to a show in 1975 called Animals in Art, which was the first great international wildlife art exhibition at the Royal Ontario Museum.
I went to that, yes.
Yeah, I mean, it was an eye-opening experience.
Yep.
And
Ken Bunn was.
we were there, and we went with a bunch of people, and the way it was organized, there was a lower floor, and then you walked up these stairs, and there was an upper floor. And as you walked up the stairs, there was a 6 by 8 foot Bruno Leafor's painting of a single curlew in a field of grass. And I was sure at that moment I wanted to actually be a painter. So I quit my job at the museum and took off to learn how to paint. And I got about 1,000 paintings into it. And then realized that I actually needed to make some money, and I literally did not have a dime. And I hitchhiked from Vermont down to Washington, D.C., and hit the pavement, and eventually got a job as a secretary at the Nature Conservancy. But I went to work for a guy named Robert Jenkins, who was really the founder of modern conservation theory, basically. I went to work for Bob. He hired me as a secretary, but I couldn't type, so he made me a researcher. I couldn't file, so they made me a director. And I spent 11 or 12 years at the Nature Conservancy. The first 3 was, I did endangered species inventories throughout California, Oregon, and Washington. And then the last 7 or 8 years of my working there, I actually ran their land management division. At the time, we had about 1.5 million acres, and I got to travel all over the West all over the country. The important part of that was I got to visit museums everywhere, small and large, but I got to see America and its landscapes through the eyes of some of the smartest field biologists in the country. I mean, my general week was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I'd be in the office in DC working on budgets and whatever, and then Thursday morning you get on a plane and you'd basically be out from Thursday morning until Sunday night when you'd fly back to Washington, just going places. We spent one day in the office working on budgets and fundraising schemes, and 3 days out looking at stuff. And yeah, well, so that was the best job in the world. So I quit. Because I really did want to learn to sculpt at some point. I started actually doing some sculptures in 1980. I think I quit the Nation Conserve in 87. It's a long answer, but I'll get rid of all the biography. What I had going for me, which is hard to explain to younger people who want to learn to sculpt, was I had a family, John and Kiku Haynes. And I had done a piece of sculpture for Kiku, her husband had commissioned this thing. And he asked me, he said, well, how come you don't do more? And it was a pair of Avocets. It was the first thing I cast, I think. And I said, well, I do more, but I think I lost $1,000 on the one I made for you. And John just sort of said, okay. And he said, well, if you wanted to learn how to do this, how much money would you need? And he said, put together a business proposal, which I did, and we had dinner, and he looked at me and he goes, well, you're only off by a factor of 4. I thought I'd need about $50,000, $60,000 a year, and he said, no, you're gonna need about $200,000 a year by the time this gets going. And the truth of it is he was completely right. I didn't, you do a bad painting and you're out $5. Every mistake you make in sculpture starts at $1,500. And nobody comes out of the womb knowing how to do this. And you're going to spend you're going to waste $100,000 learning how to sculpt if you choose to do it in that way. And I don't know why John understood that, but he just did. And so for 20 years, I was Curlew Castings of Virginia. The business arrangement was set up that they own 95% of me. Since we were losing money hand over fist, he was happy for the deduction. But as we started making money, he started transferring the stock until at the end, they own 3% and I own they own 5% and I own 95%. But then there was one of these amazing things that you don't realize how lucky you are in general. We had accumulated a fairly large capital account. And the IRS would not let him forgive that. He didn't want the money. There was, I don't know, a couple $100,000 in it. And he figured out how to give my kids at the maximum amount they could give every year, which they would then buy back his shares of stock until we had transferred all the remainder of it. But now my kids legally own 5% of me, which I got to admit is a pain. So anyway, that's the long.
At the board meeting, they like to argue.
Yeah. So I'm sorry for the link though, but now you don't need to know anything else.
I hope you all noted Walt's piece in the exhibition last night. It's a glorious piece, there's no question about it. It's, all his work is. As a two-dimensional artist, when I look at sculpture, I often see the sculpture framed within a frame. And as I move around the sculpture, that composition changes. And I'm looking at it from the two-dimensional aspect of look at the forms and the shapes. And I caught myself doing that last night with that piece. And it's so abstract in form as you move around it, the way he's constructed the piece. Talk a little bit about your philosophy of approaching what you want to portray, having chosen animals as your subject matter.
Everybody here knows in their soul that we are not in the description business. We're in the intent business. You know, we're basically not trying to simply describe things. We're trying to get across what we want to say about that particular object. We all start at the same spot where you're desperate simply to get it right. You know, you want to get everything in the right position. But once you have crossed that, you fight with it every time you start another piece. You know, you first got to get it right. But invariably it comes to intent. What do you want to say in this? Sculpture is wonderful in that, you know, we get to start in a three-dimensional world and end in a three-dimensional world. It's not like the magic of painting where you're going from 3 dimensions to 2 dimensions. You guys are all chasing light, and sculptors by and large are chasing gravity. And you're trying to decide, you know, how do I engineer a piece such that it can be shipped. I know that sounds silly, but a lot goes into it. You're trying to make a decision of what is the scale that something has to be for it to get across to what I want to say. You're trying to decide, all right, how much real estate can I actually ask for in somebody's home if I'm ever going to sell one of these things? So regardless of what your idea and your intent is, you actually have to have an end buyer, sort of. All of which is getting around to the question you asked, which is, okay, so I'm doing the pheasant. I do a lot of what is, you know, colloquially named sporting art. The thing about sporting art is that something's about to eat and something's about to get eaten. And whatever you do, you have to imply that somebody else is in the story. Otherwise, you're not going to get the intent across. And so I spend a lot of time thinking about how am I going to make this piece look like it's going somewhere, and what gesture and attitude do I have to give it so it implies that something else is in the picture looking for it. So that particular piece really was, I mean, I did the piece because I just thought of it. I mean, this happens to me. I don't know if it happens to you. I do pieces because I think of titles. And I'm like, oh man, this would make a great sculpture, you know? So I was listening to that song, Slip Sliding Away, and I thought, that'd be a great hen pheasant. You know, just sort of leaving town while the males are getting blasted. And so that's what that story was about, was, you know, the sneaky bird lives another day. Now, you then get into the engineering of something like that, and...
Well, that's the point that I was trying to get you to come to. The pheasant, the pheasant is spectacular, but it's the accompanying geometric shapes that you chose to include in that sculpture, in the positions that they are in. What do you see when you're composing the other elements of a particular sculpture outside of the animal itself? What is your philosophical idea of taking, you know, this shape and this shape and this shape? Do you see things in a
Yes.
abstract form?
We are all artists out of the Western art tradition. The triangle has been established a long time ago as the primary structure of how you hold things together. If you look at that piece, all it is a series of triangles. Now, it may be nothing more, Terry, than we've all gone to art history classes, we've all had this drilled into us, so we expect to see that, and it's comfortable to us. It allows you to look away the engineering. I mean, birds are inherently light, and I'm doing them in metal. And I have to come up with ways of supporting these things that the engineering does not overwhelm the idea. You know, I can't tell you how many times I've gone to shows and you'll see this lovely sculpted bird and it's got a stick up its ass to hold it in place. And you're like, what? You know, I mean, you destroyed the whole idea of it. So I'm always thinking about, I mean, I'm thinking from the beginning, I'm thinking about how am I actually going to support this thing so that you're not paying any attention to the engineering. When you're doing flying birds, I call it the seeing, knowing conundrum. With photography, with video, with all the access to the internet, you basically can know everything now. There is no excuse for getting anything wrong. There just isn't. But let's take a flying bird. You can know that gesture since Muybridge. You could know that gesture from here all the way to there. But I bet if I passed out a sheet of a Muybridge running tiger or walking horse or whatever and pass it out and I'd say, circle for me which ones of these are sculptural. They're all right, but which ones are sculptural? And I'll bet you we'd have a 95% overlap of people because there are only certain points along the range of motion that your eye can understand it. And so when I'm sculpting birds or whatever, I'm always trying to figure out, okay, if I close my eyes, what part of this motion can I picture? You know, where along that range of motion is it stopped long enough for me to register it? And that's the only things I sculpt. I don't sculpt anything I can't see. And it's the same in the birds I do, in the dogs I do. I basically will only sculpt what I call my 7-yard distance. After 7 yards, I can't see it, and I can't make it believable in my sculpting, because after that point, the details get in the way of the intention.
Do you find that to be limiting in any way your design philosophy? Or have you learned how to adapt to that because of the way what you just described about your 7-yard distance?
Well, I mean, is it limiting? If I were a landscape painter, I guarantee you, I wouldn't give a rat's ass about the mountains. I'm more interested in the creek that's 7 yards from me. Now, part of this is because I grew up in the East, where the atmospheric distortion was such that there was no such thing as a mountain in distance. All there was sort of a purple haze.
That's why they call them smoke.
I mean, I remember for years, I mean, I didn't go out west until I was 21, I think, but I had seen a number of Western art paintings, either from that or Philadelphia or Cleveland or wherever, and I basically didn't believe it. I mean, I simply was like, nothing can be this sharp. And I remember getting off the plane in 1972 in Jackson, Wyoming, and I flew it on the wrong side, so I didn't see the Tetons. I got off the plane and I stepped out and I was like, oh my God, there really is no atmosphere. Those mountains are 30 miles away and they are crisp as if they were in front of me. And I think a lot of what we choose to do has to do with, you know, sort of our organic being. You know, my world is 7 yards away. And I just don't do anything I can't. Sculpture is about planes and volumes, you know? I mean, it's not about surface. Surface is for weenies. If you can't sell the show, it's like a painting. Screw up the values and the color doesn't matter. sculpture, you know, screw up the plane, and it doesn't matter if they got the number of feathers right. Who cares? If they aren't rounded right, if they aren't throwing light back in the right way to describe the volumes and describe weightlessness or weight, depending upon how you want to do it. I spend an inordinate amount of time on my sculptures, on the underneath and the feet. And people ask, well, you know, why? And I actually know how to do armatures. I do them from the side, so I can roll them over and work underneath and roll them back and roll them.
Oh, you don't just sit on the ground?
No, I don't do that anymore. I met a girl that did that, and but feet are just this enormously important thing because they set gravity. I'll change an entire head, neck, tail, and everything if I wind up with a set of feet that are so definitively right. You know, and you look at it and you go, okay, if this is where the weight's distributed, that wing's got to come up, or that head's got to move this way. And so, I mean, if you want to know what I'm really good at, feet.
Thinking about things that have influenced you in any way, shape, or form as a sculptor, as an artist, as a creative person, what would they be? What would be the most important influences upon you?
Driftless Glen alcohol.
There we go. I'm not following you, hold up. We'll do it on Instagram.
I don't sculpt often, but when I do.
Okay, that's an ad in the new magazine.
I grew up surrounded by the sculptures of a man named Albert Leslie, who was an American sculptor out of Philadelphia. And he had the same sensibility I did, or I have the same sensibility that he did. And I've been trying to figure out some of his surfaces and decisions for 50 years. He was just that good. And they had 6 or 7 of them at the museum in Cleveland. And I also grew up in Cleveland, which was an interesting city because it had a fabulous art museum. And as a kid, I got to flip the pages on the elephant folio. Well, you know, that'll rock your world. Just seeing the difference between a painter like Wilson, who was in effect doing a field guide, and Audubon, who was basically doing these incredibly abstract designs using birds as his medium. And so I pretty well learned early on that I wasn't interested in illustration. The other thing that happened to me in Cleveland is that one of the board members of the Natural History Museum had a really, really good art collection, in which was about 7 or 8 big Frank Benson oils. And Frank Benson had a 15-yard vision. If you look at what he paints, there's nothing in there that you can't see. You know, he may know that there's 9 primaries in a duck, but he never painted 9 primaries in his life. He basically painted gestures that you could see from a distance, and so they read so true. And between Leslie's attention to detail of the gesture, Audubon's intent on design quality, and living with these Frank Bensons of thinking about, okay, if you're going to be a sporting artist, what's the ante? How good you got to be? And so yeah, those 3 things.
In your travels.
You don't want to get pigeonholed. I mean, one of the things that I almost kind of shiver when somebody says, I'm a scratchboard artist. I'm a this artist, I'm a that artist. It's like, no, you're an artist, and right now your expression is in this. Because you're either going to run out of ideas, or you're going to start repeating yourself, or you're going to come to the conclusion that I can't make a living at this, and it might drive you out of it because you didn't plan ahead.
And you talk about a time when you were discouraged and how you survived that?
I've never been discouraged,
Really?
ever. I mean, I've been through, well, I mean, you know, not everybody had a John Kiku Haynes. Let's start with just the reality of it, and, you know, put the finances aside. The best thing that happened to me was in 1985 or 80, no, in 1987. I was in Jackson, Wyoming. I was not doing this full time. I was coming out of a gallery, Jack Dennis, which was upstairs from a fly shop. And they had this gallery upstairs, and they had a couple paintings. They had a bunch of paintings up there. And one of them was a pair of pileated woodpeckers in a winter apple tree. And it was a really good painting. And I talked to the gallery gal, and I said, God, who did this? And she said, oh, that's Bill Reese. Bill Reese was a spectacular painter, sculptor, etcher, everything. Anyway, she goes, that's Bill Reese. And oh, he's walking up the stairs. And I introduced myself, and we went to lunch, and then we went to dinner. And for 35 years, Bill mentored me through ups and downs and overs and unders, because he'd been in the business forever too. So, you know, I mean, the best thing Bill ever said to me, he said, Walter, once something's really working for you, you gotta start doing something else. And he meant that in a small way, you know, don't count on any one gallery to float your boat. But it was also, don't, you know, make sure you don't get yourself only applying the same solution to every problem. Don't let yourself not try other things, because what's working today is not going to work tomorrow. And you know, if I, you know, you asked the question, were there discouraging times? Yeah, making transitions were discouraging. You know, you did a lot of bad stuff in the interstices of your career. But it wasn't discouraging in that way. It was more angering. It's like,
Frustrating.
Have you ever lost the muse?
No,
You've never gone through a dry spell?
no.
Good for you.
Sculpture is different than, I mean, listen, I could not be a painter in real life. I mean, I want to start to learn to paint. I'm getting arthritis in my hands, and I can't hold the damn tools, and everything about sculpture sucks. I forgot where I was going with this, forget it.
It's about being amused.
Oh, being amused, yeah.
You're not being amused.
No, I think it is important to always be looking at things. And so yesterday, Thursday, I was in Middleburg, Virginia, and they have a show there right now of the Big Four. It's 47 large paintings of Frise, Kunert, Rungius, and Leaforce. It's worth going. It'll make you want to slit your wrists, but it's worth going. And I think the way of never losing your muse is to always surround yourself with great work. Because, you know, you leave initially like, oh man. There was a Sargent in Spain show at the National Gallery this winter. And you left there just thinking, why bother? You know, you really did. And then you go, wait, what about how he treated that? How could I use that in this? And so for me, it's just always looking at great work. And it's always kept me really, really enthused about trying something else.
We have young, impressionable artists sitting in this room, some of whom have just joined the SAA, some who are just coming into the business, other than what you just voiced, which is good information for young artists. What else would you say to a young artist who is coming into the world of animal art? What advice would you give them?
Be born rich, marry rich. What advice? This is a really complicated thing, because when a lot of us came into this business, it was following up on the huge surge of interest in animals in the 1970s from Earth Day, and, you know, the environmental movement and the passage of the Clean Water Act, Clean Air. I mean, there was a perfect storm of people's interest in wildlife, not necessarily animals, but in wildlife. And around that, there were a tremendous number of entrepreneurs that basically put together all kinds of shows, and so there was a venue out there to, as I say, make your chops. You know, there's just ways of getting into it that I don't honestly know how to do now. I will say that the 25 years from 75 to 2000, and maybe I'll say the 50 years from 75 to 25, this last 50 years, may be the first time in history as many people made a living calling themselves a fine artist. I doubt there's ever been another period of time when, you know, there were all kinds of artisans, there were people that worked in guilds, there were people that, but we old guys lived through a very different time, and you can't look at a young person and say, well, I did it, why can't you, you know? No, there are just too many other things going on. I will say that there are enough older people doing enough good work, and in the next 10 years, there are going to be enough collectors who are going to die, so that a whole lot of really good work is going to come back on the market. And you better chase your own vision, because everything that somebody else has already done has already been done, and it's been done better than you're going to do it at the moment, and you're not going to be able to get bandwidth without staying your own course. I know that sounds like, you know, graduation advice from, you know, old folks, but you're not going to get anywhere in this if someone's got to look at the name to see who did it. At the same time, you're not going to believably come up with your signature quickly. There are people that have tried, and it looks so fake. There are, and plus, I don't know, I mean, I couldn't get up every day and paint the same thing again and again. I just couldn't do it. Oh, that's what my point was. One of the reasons sculptors don't lose their muse quite as fast as painters do is that I only got to do about 12 pieces a year. You know, even I could come up with 12 ideas. You know, the average painter probably has to crank out 30 paintings a year. And the truth is, if you go into the Met, if you go into the National Gallery, and you look at the dates on a lot of those paintings that you're in love with, it'll say, you know, painted 1904 to 1912. You know, these things didn't get painted, framed, and put on a shelf. You know, they got painted, they sat in the studio, they got reworked, they got beaten up, they got put away, they got looked at again, more information came in. You know, the idea, and this is partly, you know, this weird 50 years of art as a retail thing. Art was never a retail business. So the people that were artists, you know, if they worked 2 years on a canvas, it's because it took 2 years. But damn it looks like it, you know? It isn't, these are paintings, they're not pictures, they're paintings. If I wanted to get cranky about it, I'd say the plein air movement has done more to destroy art than any single thing in the world. The conversation, I mean, it's all process over product. I mean, who cares if it's done plein air if it stinks? You know? Oh, it's outside, it looks like it. You know?
What do you want your legacy to be?
One good bird dog. What about legacy? I don't really worry about it. You get a Paris Salon catalog of 1896, and this theoretically was the better 1886, would be more like. And you look through those things, and this was the best of Europe in 1886 according to the Salon people. And there's like 3 of those 100 paintings that are still in play. History sorts it out. It's not your job to be concerned with it. I only know, I mean, I'm mostly in the Western art genre, which is weird because I think I told somebody today, I'm this guy that brings pheasants to rodeos, you know. But for me, it works because, you know, there are 250 paintings in the Prix de West and every one of them's got a cow in it, you know, and I got a yellow-headed blackbird, you know. I mean, I'm not looking for the cow people, but I'm giving somebody another option. And it's a good thing. I mean, I've done some really good turkeys.
Turkeys.
But mostly history's gonna sort it out, and it's not worth worrying about.
I want to thank you, Walt, for your honesty and there's a lot of things that you said today that represent a lot of the way I feel about how I approach my art. And I'll bet the same thing holds true for you as well, which is one of the things that binds all of us in this room together. It's that commonality of having an understanding of what it is to be an artist. And it's good every once in a while to get reinforced by hearing somebody else say it. It reinforces what's inside of you.